forgot.
Okay.
Oh, we're live. There we go.
yeah, we're live. Yeah, I know. I had to hit the button there. Yeah, I kind of thought about that actually on the way. Anyways, thanks for you folks who have joined the stream, and the few that are probably getting in on right now. Just before I start anything, I got the notification from StreamYards. If you're on X, and I know it's still quite rare, and not many people are following my live streams on X as of yet. Although that is the place to be doing it, because at least guaranteed you're not going to have any suppression or hiding of my content or anything. But I will just point out now they've added. So if you comment, if you're watching this on X and you comment, now I'm supposedly going to be able to see it through my StreamYard software. So that's a great thing, because I really do. In addition to me and Tim, what we're going to be talking to today, I definitely want to get some people's comments and questions in on this, because I think this is something that's actually quite important for anybody. I don't care who you are or however you want to identify. If you're anti-establishment, anti the status quo in any way, shape, or form, this in some way is going to affect you, and it's probably going to appeal to your sensibilities. But I thank you very much, Tim, for coming on with me, because as a fellow libertarian, this is kind of thing. So when we're talking about this article, and it's actually, let me just bring it up on the screen here. All right. This now, as Bruce presented it, Bruce Party, he's a constitutional lawyer and a really great guy. I pay attention to quite a bit of stuff that he's been doing. And he's basically, kind of breaking things down along two camps, let's say. One is the freedom camp, and the other is the virtue camp. Now, let me just scroll back up to the top here, make sure this is on. Yeah. So basically, just to give you an idea, the virtue camp, loosely now, mind you, of course, there's going to be a little bit of exceptions, outliers and stuff like that, but loosely you would suggest are what would be considered the conservatives. Big C conservatives, like government, people that, you actually use government as your means.
Well, you know what? I don't even know if it's that, Bennett. When I read this, I'm picking up that this guy, Bruce Party, is going to a lot of these unity rallies, right? These events where populists are filling up town halls and meeting together to figure out how we push back against the establishment. Mm-hmm. And in this group of people, he's noticing two camps forming. And you and I are very familiar with these camps. It might describe the difference between, for example, the PPC and the Libertarian Party, right? Mm-hmm. And the camps are the virtue people and the freedom people, right? Mm-hmm. They both hate the establishment. They both don't like where things are going. And they are filling up town halls to see how they can work together. And they're like oil and water, right? and so on the one hand, you have the virtue people who, you're right, they have conservative sensibilities, right? They believe in all the traditional values, family, a boy is a boy, a girl is a girl, tradition, charity. You think of all the good things in life, that maybe like the Burkean idea of the little platoons, that society is best organized around church and all these different things. But they also have no problem whatsoever using the government to impose those virtues, right? And we see this all the time on the populist right. So for example, the vaccines are dangerous. They're not properly tested, therefore they ought to be banned, right? So they're on the one hand, as a libertarian, I'm against imposing force. So I'm against the vaccine mandates right from the hop, even if they weren't dangerous. But I'm also against banning them, even if they are dangerous, because I think people ought to be able to judge for themselves. I'm about freedom. I'm one of the freedom people. But a small c conservative or a populist conservative would look at that and say, these vaccines must be banned. Or I don't like what's being taught in public school. We need to ban the teaching of this or these types of books or this type of thing from public school. Whereas I'm like, you're missing the forest for the trees. Public schools are the enemy, not what's being taught in them. I don't care how you reform them. So this is, I think, what Bruce Party is noticing here is that we've got in these populist town hall meetings, you've got two camps. You've got the virtue people and you've got the freedom people, and they don't really understand each other that well. And so that's kind of what the article is talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good summary of the article. Actually, what I was going to do is because Brownstone Institute, they're really good in terms of not just producing the articles, but also you can listen along in audio form. So I'm thinking probably a good way to deal with this, because there's a lot, and I even wrote down my own little points, is just kind of listen to it. It's only 6.5 minutes long in total, and then kind of just stop and kind of, voice our opinions on each point as we go, kind of deal.
Yeah, Bennett, I'm just I got my earbuds in wireless. I'm going to listen. I just got to pop out and grab an energy drink because I want to get fired up here. Okay.
Yeah, for sure, man. Right on. All right. So like I say, Tim's just going to get himself set up there. So in the meantime, like I say, I'm just going to start playing this. Actually, before I do, since there are already a few folks in the chats there, I might as well get to them real quick. So Rectitude Media, 100%. I'm voting PPC because they're the only party that's serious about not printing our way out of this. I volunteered in local elections for the Libertarian Party, but sadly, too many commies. Okay, so actually, I guess before we get into the actual article, I'm sure Tim heard that as well. So I don't know. Actually, let me throw that over to you, Tim, seeing as how you were the former leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. According to Rectitude Media, she's filled right full of the commies, apparently. So
Jesus, I certainly didn't notice that at all. I was leader of the Libertarian Party for 7 years. I didn't see any commies in there. There are certainly people that I would say are more come to libertarianism, maybe from the left, that have some that are concerned about, I don't know, they're concerned about social issues, right? Like they want the freedom of gays to marry, or they want they're more focused on freedom to do drugs and freedom to do gays to marry and freedom to engage in hedonism and stuff like that. I can get why some people that would rub some people like the virtue people the wrong way, right? Because it can come across like these people just want they want to do commie shit, like have butt sex and snort meth or whatever, right? But certainly none of them would be in favor of government seizing the means of production. No one would be in favor of government controlling your economic lives or anything like that. But certainly in the libertarian camp, there's people that have more right-wing sensibilities and people that have, like I said, those more left-wing sensibilities. And it's very tough for those two camps to kind of get along, even in the Libertarian Party. So you can even subdivide people even further on the freedom people even further into segments if you want, right? You can divide them into people who want who are more focused on property rights and free markets, and then those that are more focused on social issues. But look, they're all at the end of the day subscribe to the same basic first principles, which is thou shalt not initiate force, even if you win a popularity contest and call yourself government, and thou shalt not respect each other's property, and all rights are property rights. And that is a fundamental moral truth. It's a virtue, I would say. I kind of take umbrage with distinguishing freedom from virtue. I think freedom is a virtue. I think, maybe freedom isn't a virtue, but certainly imposing your will on other people, taking away their freedom, is a goddamn vice. It's a sin. It's evil. It's immoral. And so I don't know how you can call people virtuous if they're imposing their will on people.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And this is one area where I think, and I don't know if Bruce quite exactly delved right into this thing, but if not, we're going to bring it to the conversation. But here's the thing and it's something that I've been talking about and promoting for years, especially for people who've been watching my content, is Yeah, let's define these terms, because I think the biggest problem is the fact that people use these words so loosely, and then it sounds like the people are talking past each other rather
Right.
than at each other. And that's the thing I think that we're really going to get into when it comes to this.
Well,
And it kind of
but
sounds
hold
to
on a
me,
second here, Bennett. I
yeah,
just want to throw this back to Rectitude Media, who's
yep,
voting PPC because he says the Libertarian Party has too many commies. Well,
mm,
how do you get around the statism in the PPC? Is what I want to know. In other words, how do you get around the commie attitudes of we need to ban things? You know,
mm,
we need to ban things in schools. They're not, they have never come out against public schools. They're about teaching conservative things in public schools. Well, public schools are a goddamn commie construct. So shouldn't you be anti-communist like the
yeah,
Libertarian Party? And what about borders? Let's talk about borders for a second. Yes, migration patterns, migration is an issue, and that, you know, I recognize that. And the difference between the PPC and the Libertarians' border policy is that, first of all, the Libertarian policy was actually probably more restrictive and would result in fewer people coming to Canada than even the PPC. But the biggest difference is that it sought to get the government out of immigration altogether. And that's why I think libertarian policy is so effective. But the PPC wants communist control over immigration. I mean,
mm,
commie countries are renowned for the state strictly controlling the borders both ways, right? And they want the government to control who comes in and comes out. The same people that impose lockdowns on you, that removed your freedom, you think somehow it can be reformed and used, this commie institution can be used to fix problems like immigration. And that's essentially what the heart of this article gets to. And this is why I think we're seeing it right here live on this chat.
yeah,
You know, we're seeing a virtue person, a person who has great virtues in that, look, I want Canadian identity. I want traditional values. I believe in family. And by the way, I believe in all those things too. And
mm-hmm,
and a lot of freedom people do. Now, admittedly, there's some freedom people who are hedonists, that are libertines, right? That just want freedom to do all the sinning they want. You know, okay, I get that. But the biggest sin of all is government. It's the state. That's the original sin, and that's what the virtue people don't recognize. And that, by the way, corrupts the whole enterprise that the virtue people are trying to do. You ask the state to protect your culture and to protect your nation and to do all these things. Well, you can be guaranteed that the opposite is going to happen over time. That's just the way it works. The state is the enemy of the people, and it can't be used for the good of the people. And that's just the bottom line. And I think that's another thing that distinguishes freedom people from virtue people, is that the virtue people don't see the state as evil. It's just the people who are in there now that are evil. The institution is fine. Having a criminal enterprise that has the monopoly on force and the mandate on force to violate and violently impose its will on you, no problem with that. It's just that the wrong people are doing the violent imposing. Well, no, we say it's bad from from stem to stern. It's the whole thing is corrupt, and it can't not be corrupt. So anyways, sorry about it.
No problem. Me personally, I see it as a lack of consistency in your apparent morals or your principles. That's really what it comes down to me. But I'm gonna, like I say, Tim, I'm gonna start this out here and play just a little bit of it at first, and then we'll deal with it as we go along. I just want to make sure. Hopefully, this is going to play right through the
Friends or Enemies.
Okay.
By Bruce Party or Enemies. By Bruce Party at brownstone.org. There's an elephant in the room, the speaker declared. He was right. I was at a gathering, as I often am, of people who aspire to rescue their countries from descending into woke, collectivist hell. But the attendees were not of one mind. Instead, there were two kinds of people in attendance. The elephant in the room was the tension between them. Across the West, virtue people and freedom people have been working together. At conferences, in think tanks, at school boards, on email lists, in living rooms, on X, and sometimes marching in the streets, they coalesce. These two groups constitute the Rebel Alliance against authoritarian woke globalism.
So before we continue on, I just wanted to bring myself into this. And this is the part, once again, where initially And I've seen this now, right now, in this particular context of this article, it would be like Tim was alluding to earlier, your typical conservatives or your populist types. And what it is libertarians who actually, have been talking about this stuff for a long, long, long time, have just noticed, and in this particular example or this particular junction, have noticed that there are people who at the bare minimum, at the very least, share our concern with the rise of this woke ideology that seems to be permeating through our culture. Oh, go ahead, Tim. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's those three words, right? That he says we're in a rebel alliance against authoritarian woke globalism, right? Well, libertarians have been alerted to this stuff for a while because we're against the very first word in that. We're not just against woke globalism, we're against authoritarian. And so this is just another brand of it. But of course, the antidote we have is different. Many on the populist right, the virtue people, let's say, that this article is talking about, are looking at authoritarian nationalism as the answer, the antidote to authoritarian woke globalism. And we say, no, that's just that all you're doing is changing the square footage, and that is not good enough for us. We don't want any authoritarianism.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the part. And like I say, at this particular time, but you could also pull this out. This article could have been written, with the context where libertarians could find themselves on the side of some of those, people that claim to be, on the woke side of things, right? Or some of these people that are globalists. There are areas like Tim was alluding to earlier. I would agree with them in terms of, borders and stuff. The borders that matter to me are the borders around me and the things I own. Right? Yeah. That's the important borders. And that's what distinguishes what's yours and what's mine. These international borders or boundaries that are created, an invent of government, of basically, turning the earth into basically a large landmass of plantations, right? There might be 200 plus plantations, but we libertarians can look back at it and see it for what it is, rather than this concept that it's always the other people, right? They're the bad ones, but the people in your backyard or in your particular plantation are somehow just created from a different kind of cloth.
Yeah, what we need, what we're told quite often is the government to ban wokeness, right? That's what we need. We need the government to ban these woke stuff and ban. And we're like, look, where do you think all this came from in the first place? Do you think that absent the state that you support controlling things and controlling culture, we would have all this woke nonsense? Of course not. This is a byproduct of the state. And so, unless you address the root of the problem, you're not going to fix that. And what you're doing is, from what we can tell, fertilizing the roots here. You're hacking off a few rotten branches, sure, but the whole tree is rotten, and you keep fertilizing it, and you're not pulling it up. So, anyways,
no, that's a good point, Tim. Good point. Actually, I'm just going to, like I say, jump back into it because I think that's kind of, like I say, that's the area, and this is maybe Rectitude Media. If you're paying particularly close attention, this is not. We're not discussing this particular article as a means to clobber or bash over the heads of the people who are considered populist, or someone like Rectitude Media, right? Or whatever, whoever he supports in terms of the PBC and stuff. This is not about that. What this is, just like me, here's a good way or analogy that I'm going to use is, I know lots of people. I've grown up with lots of people in my age cohort, and even people older than me and younger me. And I, along with a lot of them, I've raised 2 sons, and some, or it doesn't have to be sons, could be daughters. I'm saying I raised children, and I watched other people raise their children in a similar manner as a status would, in terms of treating society, in terms of using force as your means to an end, as the means to teach your kids to be better, to be good people, let's say, right? To be virtuous in some way. Whereas myself, because I did grow up in a time frame, and I personally experienced a lot of that violence, not just from my own family, but seemingly a lot of the adults at the time when I was a child. And even as a child, I started to understand it seems very hypocritical. I'll never forget the day when I threw a snowball up in the air and it had come down and landed on a girl's head. Now, I didn't mean to do it, but it would be considered something that, could have caused harm to someone. And the answer to that by the teacher who was out there at the time was to hit me, to use violence against me because I had hit this girl with a snowball on, but even if it wasn't on purpose, but let's say it even had been on purpose. It wasn't, but let's just say it was. So what is the answer to, or what was the message to me to teach me to not, use force or violence or to hurt other people? Well, it was to hurt me. And this is coming from an adult, someone in a position of authority. So to me, it was something that I even understood as a small child. Well, this seems quite contradictory. If you're telling me that using violence or causing harm to other people, that's a bad thing. That's a terrible thing to do. Then by the fact that an adult who is actually much bigger than I am and actually in a much more prominent position to do that to me, using that kind of violence on me, that message just sent the wrong thing. Whereas me, when I raised my kids, I remember thinking as I was raising them,
that teacher was teaching you that force is the correct way to solve problems, right?
Right, exactly. And for me, I didn't think that was the right answer. So
and not just force, but revenge force, right?
Right. That's the other thing. Actually, I'm glad you bring up the revenge thing, because that seems to be the thing that they share in common, whether you're talking about the people who come from the populist left or some of these populists or authoritarians or the right and the left. They seem to, it's that vengeance. Like, of course, it's a terrible thing when something bad happens, but that vengeance, that kind of lust for blood in the eyes. I mean, that's another different thing that that kind of separates us. But like I say, to me,
it's part of human nature, right? I mean, that's why we love movies like John Wick, where they kill his dog and he goes on a bloody killing spree, or what's that one with Liam Neeson, where I have a particular set of skills, and Taken. And we love those movies, right? But of course, we can't have a peaceful society based around revenge. We have to use force protectively and try to restore justice, right? And so how do you restore justice in a situation? That ought to be our focus. Okay, Bennett, you threw a snowball dangerously, haphazardly. We know you didn't intend to hurt this girl, but you did. So what are we going to do to fix this situation? How can we make amends to Sally and fix it? That would have been the right way to approach that situation, rather than just inflict pain on old Bennett there. Right. And then you could have actually restored your relationship with Sally. Sally might have got some restitution. Here, Sally, you can have my candy from my lunch pail. I'm really sorry. Okay, amends have been made. You've paid your restitution. You've restored that relationship. Sally feels made whole, and we're that's a proper, but you're right. I mean, what you're doing here is making drawing the line of causality from childhood to the state, right? Because it's in childhood where we learn that inflicting force and inflicting punishment and imposing your will on people is how you get order. But that's how we end up in the situation we end up. And that's why the government has such a boner about ensuring they do public education, right? And ensuring that they are educating our children. And of course, they're always going to educate it in a way that benefits the government, that benefits the state, that grows the state. They're not doing it to benefit your children, that's for sure. And to think that they are is to be naive. But I noticed here that Rectitude Media has a bunch of comments. Maybe they're a little bit behind on the broadcast, but I just want to say, I see those comments and I appreciate that. There's some complimentary things about your boy Tim here, and I appreciate that. And he's pointing out that I guess he came across someone who was maybe identified as a commie or something. That's going to happen in every party, right? And I see a lot of former PP, and there's a lot of Wayfair libertarians too, right? There's people who pass through the libertarian movement without really understanding the principles because of a message or that they like, freedom for me, right? But then when it comes to other people, they're like, oh, I don't really like that person having the freedom to do that, and so they kind of breeze through, and they come from the left and the right, and we see that in the PPC as well, right? There's some crossover because, you know, on the populist right, there's a lot of similarities to the populist left. There's a big focus on corporations. Corporations are evil, right? They're the problem. It's the Pfizers of the world, and this and that are the problem. And so when they are very easily attracted to left wing. I mean, the left has owned that criticism for years, and they're really good at criticizing corporations, and so they quite often get attracted to that leftist propaganda. And, you know, I've seen some people who were very supportive of the PPC early on who are now avowed communists. They're no longer supporting the PPC, of course, because the PPC isn't a communist party per se, but they are avowed communists, that they identify as such, and they think that's perfectly reasonable. So, and it all stems with, okay, I have no problem with the state, but I do have, as long as it's doing things I like, and imposing my agenda on the people. And I hate corporations, and I hate these megalomaniacs in these corporations. And so I want the state to control corporations. And what better way to do that than with communism?
Yeah. Well, to me, I mean, the question I would have for anyone, including Rectitude Media or anyone that's paying attention to this, that find themselves on the side of the virtue types, right, is so if force is an acceptable means to an end, and we're not talking here in terms of genuine defense of actual violence that's taken place in the physical realm here, right? We're talking about the state apparatus, which is, you know, the pretense of this unit, this entity that has the monopoly of violence, that has the perception that it can do the things that neither of us can do without, at the very least, you know, being considered immoral or unethical. So to me, the question that I would have for Rectitude or anyone that supports the virtue side is how can you trust, right? Where does that trust come from? And trust is a very major key factor in any kind of relationship, whether you're talking about societal level or in the family or the community level. Trust is of paramount importance. How do you trust people who literally will tell you to your face, right? Like, or subtly in ways, right? That they want to use violence, theft, because let's not forget about what the state also represents too, is theft is a major factor, but they will use violence and theft, aka force, as the means to their end. That's the part that would be the first question off the top of my head that I would want to ask, you know, someone that supports the virtue side, is how can you trust someone that advocates for the use of violence as a means to an end?
Yeah. Well, and maybe it's just a matter of they haven't thought deeply enough about it, right? It's like, and fair enough. Like, you know, I know a lot of people who are on the populist right now, and that's a step closer to being a freedom person than they were, right? They were just kind of normies living their life, and then all of a sudden their life got upended by the COVID regime. And they started looking around and opening their eyes and consuming a lot of information, and, you know, some of the loudest voices out there. And, you know, it's unfortunate that libertarians weren't louder or more numerous to kind of shift the tide towards the freedom side. But it's fun to get outraged on social media and look at all the nonsense out there with the trans movement and the wokeism and this and that, and see just outrageous things that the left does and point out their outrageous hypocrisy, and get sucked into that rabbit hole of, this is the fucking problem right here, is these people, these leftists. That's what's ruining this country, and you know, missing again the forest for the trees, right? That is there because of the state.
Yeah. Well, I would say, Tim, actually, just a little pushback there is, I would say that we've been, and I'll include you, although you can speak for yourself there, but I would suggest that we've been quite loud. I mean, I could yell into the microphone, but actually all I get, if I really get much louder than I am now, is just distortion. So I would suggest that we have been. I would actually recommend or suggest that the major factor that that's causing, well, I mean, not the cause of all this, but something that really has to be discussed here is the fact that we're ignored constantly.
Right.
That's the big thing, because to pretend, especially, like, I'll just speak for myself. I mean, come on, I've got literally, thousands of videos and live streams, right? And article. I mean, for 12 years straight. I'm all over social media, all of the big ones, and even some of the the smaller ones, right? So I've been out there, not literally, but proverbially with the bullhorn, right? Just, and you have too, of course. But I've been out there with the bullhorn, and I've never shied away. This is the other thing: I've never shied away from being willing to speak to anybody. So I'm sitting here, I'm waving my arms, right? I got the smoke signals going. Right? I'm yelling at the top of my lungs. And for some damn reason, these people that are really against, right, the virtue types, they're really against those woke globalists. And boy, are they ever pissed off. And I'm over here saying, hey, listen, I'm right there with you. But I've got a different thing on offer rather than just doing the same old. I've got a new idea, a different idea. Yet nobody wants to listen.
Well, it's tough. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of information coming at you. I've been on a bit of a fitness kick lately, and there, even in that space, right? There's so many different ideas about how to get fit, and there's a lot of overlap, but everyone is in one camp or another, and they're dogmatically in that camp, and it's becomes their identity, and it's hard to break out of that, right? So, I think there's reason to hope. I mean, I think, well,
Tim, actually, can I just cover that real quick that you said that? Because I actually, that brought perfect thing to my mind is you're right. And I could imagine, I'm even imagining in my mind all the different people at your gym and stuff, but just like at your gym, right here, that was actually a perfect analogy to use, because at your gym, everyone in there may very well, let's say everyone in that gym was saying, hey, I'm the expert. I'm the top notch. I know how to get results.
Right.
Well, you can look over at the 98-pound weakling in the corner that's got the real flabby arms and skin hanging, even though he doesn't have much in terms of weight, right? Or it looks like someone put a few toothpicks together, not being too overly judgmental. Or there might even be some dude with a great big old beard guy, right? And a lot of flab and stretch marks. But there might be someone like yourself who looks toned, fit, and you can see the muscle definition stuff. Well, at the very least, in that particular example, it wouldn't be that difficult to understand. Well, okay, everybody's claiming to have a lot of ideas, but I think at bare minimum, initially, I think I'm going to go with the guy that seems to actually not just talk the talk, but looks like he's walking the walk and is getting actual results. Right.
That,
and I would suggest for libertarians, people like you or people like myself, is not only do I got some pretty decent ideas, but I mean, my own personal anecdotal experience, mind you, but that seems to work out really well, my ideas.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Part of the problem with all of this too is that it is external focused, right? It's like, if those people would just get their shit together, we could finally live in a half decent world, right? And libertarians are no different. We're thinking, like, if only the fucking government in the state would like somehow shrivel away or drastically restrain itself, then we could finally be in the promised land and be happy, right? Well, it hasn't been working for us. We haven't got a libertarian society. We haven't got anywhere close to that. And so where my mind is going now is, how do we build something, like you say, instead of shouting at people how to work out, why don't we show them how to work out? Why don't we show them how we're working out, right? And so, some of the things I've been reading are, there's a book called The Network State. The author's last name is Balaji, I think. Okay. And he's talking about how to build these parallel societies and even build them up into nations with the technology we have now, blockchain and different things like that. So my mind is kind of on fire for something like that now. It's like, how could you build a parallel society, it would start out maybe as a club that is like a mutual aid club, right? And maybe you subscribe to it and you use those resources to help protect your members wherever they are in the world against their oppressive governments, their COVID regimes, their lockdowns, their mandates, their different things like that. And how could you build a club into then something much bigger that you could call a nation, and maybe even get diplomatic recognition even without having to take over the government or depose it or engage in any kind of violent revolution or any of the things that are typically done to change society. What if you just built it from the ground up, right under the nose of the state, worked around the state, and eventually the state, the need for the state would wither away because you're actually doing the damn thing that you are advertising and that you're talking about.
Right. Well, I like that idea. I think we're getting a little bit putting the
Sure. Yeah.
a little bit ahead of the horse there. But anyways, but yeah. So let me just get back into this a little bit more, actually, because like I say, there's another little section right here that I know we're definitely going to want to deal with.
Right.
But their political philosophies conflict. Virtue people believe that virtue is the most important thing. Tradition, faith, family, responsibility, dignity, patriotism, community, and spiritual or religious conviction are the pillars upon which the West must be built.
Okay, so the virtue people, and I actually wrote these down there, Tim, so that I don't have to go back and keep listening to it. So let's just kind of go through these here. So virtue people believe, and as he suggested, are mostly religious or Christian types, right? And the kind of things that they typically believe in would be tradition, faith, family, responsibility, dignity, patriotism, community, and spiritual religious conviction. Those are what they would suggest or deem are the pillars of the West. Now, let's just kind of go through them individually, shall we? So let's say so tradition. So tradition would be the thing that they're suggesting that there's something that's important first and foremost. Sure. Now, to me as a libertarian, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, it was tradition, right, in the West to have slaves, to own other human beings. That was a tradition. So can you say, or could I say with a blanket statement without bringing some nuance to it, that I want to maintain traditions at all costs, right? That's a priority for me. Well, see, this is the minutia. This is the nuanced area where the libertarians would thrive. Whereas just, that little 5-second snippet or that bumper sticker sounds great. Tradition, right? Especially if you're thinking in your mind, the traditions that you held near and dear to your heart and you cherished, right? But I'm sure there are probably other traditions that you would find that maybe aren't that way. And that really, when it comes down to stuff like that, is where let's talk about this tradition. If I was sitting in front of someone who was a virtue advocate, then I would bring up basically what I'm saying now and hopefully pique their interest or spark something in them to actually think, oh, okay, so maybe not everything about tradition.
Well, but by the way, Bennett, all these virtues I agree with, right? I like tradition is there's something important about tradition. What's important about it is that things emerge, traditions emerge, institutions emerged for a reason, and don't throw out those traditions without understanding how they came to be in the first place. Like, for example, I've been talking to my daughters are of marrying age. In fact, one of them just got engaged over Christmas. So we're super excited about that. And
that's pretty awesome, Tim, actually.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because actually, sorry for interrupting there.
No.
But yeah, my youngest son, Aaron, actually, he got engaged on Christmas Day. So that's pretty cool to see that on your end and mine as well. So congrats to
right. So all these talks about the talk about traditional weddings and traditional marriage are coming up in the Moen household, right? And there's, do we need to take the guy's last name and this and that? And one person said, "Oh, that's kind of just an old dumb tradition. You don't need to do that." I'm like, "Well, hold on a second. Let's before we just throw out that tradition, right? Old conservative Tim here has something to say, which is, let's understand where that tradition came from and why it came to be, and how familial lineage is important and echoes on through eternity, really, in your kids and different things like that. Let's have a discussion about that before we just throw it out and say, oh, we're just modern people and we're just going to do our own thing, which is fine. You can do that. Like, I don't want the government to impose and say to my daughter, you must take your husband's last name. But at the same time, I want her to take her husband's last name because I think there's some value in that and tradition. And I hope through just kind of discussion with her, and I'm almost positive she is going to take his last name, that she'll come to see the benefit of that and the wisdom in that. And but I totally agree with all these traditions. Faith, family, super important. Responsibility, dignity, community, all these things. Now let me ask, but here's the thing. Here's the rub for the virtue people.
Right.
Because they miss the most important virtue of all, which is don't do evil to other people. In pursuit of virtue, right? Because then you corrupt the whole enterprise. And so let's ask conservatives, how is the family? You want the family the government to control marriage because it's such an important virtue and issue marriage licenses and do all that thing. Okay, how is the institution of marriage turned out now that the government's in charge of it? How are divorce rates and marriages doing these days? Let's get legislative law involved in the family. Let's get family law in that. How's that going for you guys? And how about responsibility? Let's talk about responsibility. We're outsourcing our responsibility for everything to the state these days. So where's even the responsibility to keep marriage together and to work through marital contracts and covenants? All that should be a private affair, but it's outsourced. The responsibility for that's outsourced to the state. So you can go down the list of these virtues and see all the ways in which that in their pursuit of these virtues, they've corrupted the whole enterprise by committing the original sin of statism, of saying we need a violent institution who only exists through violent means and ends to push these virtues.
Yeah. Well, I would just add on top of that, I agree with you there. Now, of course, like I say, you have to get into the nuance of it, but I'm completely there. Like you say, tradition, faith, family, responsibility, dignity, patriotism, community, all those things are great. But like you kind of alluded to earlier, and I agree, is the thing that I would suggest is there's just a real big omission here in terms of all these things sound great, but like you said, and I wholly agree with, is where's the big virtue of not the NAP, right? The absence of the NAP, right? Virtue, right?
Right.
And
Bennett, I've always said too that when you remove government from imposing these virtues, and you're free to commit sin, the sins of vice, right? You can go see a prostitute, you can snort meth off her back, you can, do all the debaucherous, hedonistic things that you want to do. Guess what? I firmly believe that you have a much more socially conservative society over time. Why? Because you have to bear the responsibility of your vice. If you're living a hedonistic lifestyle, if you're refusing to delay gratification and just going for short-term pleasure, which is the impulse behind all these vices, your future is in jeopardy, and you bear the cost of that. And over time, you don't want to bear that cost. And it's just like, look, I've been sitting on the couch and just kind of getting out of a healthy lifestyle for a year and a half. All right. And just having mouth orgasms with chips and, like drinking when I want and just, and I had all the excuses, I'm working so much overtime and I don't have time to whatever. At the end of the day, my refusal to do the hard things now so that I can benefit later caught up with me, and I'm weighing more than I want, fatter than more out of breath, more, all these things. Right. So, but who bears the cost of that? I do. And so now what? Now I look in the mirror and I look at how I'm feeling, and I'm like, okay, I got to get back on track and make investments in doing hard things now so that I can reap the benefit later. And that's the essence of social conservatism, right? It's like, these things are important. Marriage is important because of the long-term ramifications. Faith is important because of the long-term ramifications. Not doing vice is important because of the long-term ramifications. And right now you get all the freedom to, where we're headed to now. And this is where I think some of the virtue people have a legitimate grievance with kind of the messaging of libertarians. They see libertarians asking for all this freedom, but not talking about responsibility. So they look at the world and they say, okay, they look at BC, they've just legalized all these drugs, or decriminalized, right? Okay, now we've got a serious problem. Well, but are the people that are choosing to do these vices bearing the consequences themselves? No, they're not. Of course they're not. The left is in charge. So it's the risks are socialized to the rest of us. We have to bear the cost of them having a hedonistic, addicted, drug-filled, short-term gratification lifestyle. And so you have to remove that part of it and let people choose heaven or hell on their own terms.
Right. Actually, yeah, I just want to point out there too, Tim, by the way, Bruce actually reposted this, so I'm not sure if he's watching or not, but I just want to say, if you are, Bruce, thank you very much for producing this article. There's a lot of great content in it, and I'm appreciative of everything that you do. But yeah, okay, so let's like I say, I'm going to bring this back on again, and we'll get to this next little part.
Virtue people are often, but not always, people of faith, especially of the Christian variety. Laws, governments, and society, they believe, should promote the true, the beautiful, and the good.
Yeah, so
freedom people don't share this view.
So we'll cover this here, and then I'll get to some of the comments in there, so because there's a bunch of people that are putting the comments there. So once again, too, on this one, I wrote them down here. So basically, laws, government, and society should promote the true, the beautiful, and the good. So I'll let you, if you want there, Tim, just jump off with that. So once again, I think where I would start with it, I don't know, it's up to you, but what do these things mean, right? What do these words, terms mean?
Well, and even if we agree on what they mean, and we agree that they're noble pursuits, it's how you achieve them that is the important, right? And you cannot promote the true, the beautiful, and the good at gunpoint. And that's what these people are doing. They're asking the government to promote the true and the beautiful and the good. And put another way is, we want a gang of criminals with guns to promote the true, the beautiful, and the good. And you can see just on the face of it, when you do as Confucius say and call things by their proper name rather than their propaganda name, it just falls apart under the most basic scrutiny. That, of course, the true and the beautiful and the good have been corrupted and are in scarce supply these days, because for so long, conservatives and liberals, the left and the right, have been working together to promote government for their own, for different ends, mind you, but the promotion of government in and of itself is what has led to where we're at. And this is why conservatives are impotent at slowing down the growth of the state, because at their heart, they're virtue people who agree that the state has a valuable purpose, and that's for their own ends of the true, the beautiful, the good. So that's why Michael Malice says, this is why conservatives are progressives driving the speed limit. And we see the same seeds of that in the populist right. Even, like I said, even in the PPC, I like the PPC. I like Bernier. I like a lot of the people in the PPC, but I just wish they would be called the Libertarian Party and be promoting freedom stuff rather than virtue stuff, because ultimately what they'll have to do in order to gain power. First of all, okay, let me throw a thought experiment or just an idea at you. From my own perspective, I think that Pierre Poilievre and Maxime Bernier are very closely aligned on their beliefs about government, their principles, what they believe in. Okay. But they're playing two different games. Max is playing a game, and he said this. I've spoken at an event with Max, and he said this very thing, and I give him kudos for saying it, because it's something I've been saying for so long. He said, yeah, realistically, does the PPC have a chance to form government? No, not anytime soon. What I'm trying to do is shift culture. And that's what I've said for years. That's why I was the leader of the Libertarian Party. I didn't have any delusions that we were going to get elected. But I said the most important thing in changing culture and changing government is changing the culture. And that's done one heart and mind at a time, and getting a message out there and standing on a stage. Okay, so on one hand, you have Poilievre and Bernier. They're essentially believe the same things, but they're saying very different things, and they're doing very different things, right? Poilievre is recognizing that if I want to get elected, if I want to form government, well, I need to say certain things. I need to appeal to a broad base. I need to appeal to centrists. I can't hand out easy ammunition for the media and my enemies to cut me down. And so I have to be very careful about how I tread here. So he's playing a very pragmatic game of, I need to get elected. And so, you know, if you want a guy like Bernier elected, you vote conservative, and then you end up with Pierre Poilievre. Now, what does Pierre Poilievre's government look like? Well, it doesn't look much different, does it? Because he's handcuffed himself. He's constrained by the Overton window. He's constrained by culture to do what, you know, the zeitgeist is. And the zeitgeist in Canada, the general milieu of culture is fairly left leaning, right? That's why we ended up with Trudeau. Canadians just are. They love universal healthcare. They love all these leftist things. And so you're never going to see a conservative government that is serious about winning elections come out against things that Canadians value in general, right? They're never going to, even if they are hardcore populist right-wing people like the PPC, they're never going to do those things until culture changes. So you got Maxime Bernier on the outside trying to shift culture. And yes, you're seeing more and more people talk about these things on the culture, but libertarians need to be doing this too. And our message is far more important, which is let's strike the root, not hack at a few branches here. Let's actually strike the root of this problem. And that's where, you know, I just wish Maxime Bernier had taken up my offer to run the Libertarian Party. I was going to step down as leader. He was going to step in, but he made a very specific, again, I don't know if it's because he doesn't believe in liberty or because he is trying to play a more pragmatic game and get more, attract more disaffected voters by shifting his message from libertarian when he was in the conservative leadership to populist right when he shifted and went to his own party. But at any point, at any rate, you know, I think, you know, you have to give up on this idea that winning elections is the most important thing to getting what we want. Because to win elections, you have to sacrifice all your principles like Poilievre is doing. He's actively sabotaging and sacrificing his beliefs to win an election. Maxime Bernier, to his credit, isn't doing that, but well, you know, you could argue he might be sacrificing some of his beliefs if he's a libertarian. Or maybe we should just take him at his word. He's not a libertarian. He said as much on the Dave Rubin show. He said, look, he thinks government has a role in regulating drugs, for example, and this is where he would differ with libertarians. So he's saying, I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a freedom person. I'm a virtue person, right? Yeah. So maybe we should just take him at his word and not second guess him. But at any rate, what needs to be done, what we need is a massive movement of libertarians in this country. And, you know, that's why I will always support the Libertarian Party as long as the Libertarian Party is maintaining the message that I think is so important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, when it comes to Maxime Bernier, I mean, like I say, and all the proof is in the pudding. I've got it all. It's all on my YouTube channel and on all of my social media pages. I spent a tremendous amount of time, you know, interviewing and talking to not just, I'm a founding member of the PPC, for crying out loud, right? I jumped on. Right. I was on board with everyone else. I like I say, I interviewed dozens of
by the way, I mean, I was thinking about jumping in with Bernier too. We had lots of conversations. Yep. You know, because I thought, okay, he's a libertarian, I believe, because I saw his leadership race. I met with him beforehand. We actually positioned him to be, you know, a cadre of us libertarian influencers positioned him to and influenced him to run for leadership of the Conservative Party because we believed he was a libertarian. You know, it hurt my feelings when he didn't lead my party and start promoting my principles. But at the same time, I thought, okay, well, maybe he's a wiser statesman or a wiser politician or figure than I am. And maybe what we need to do is water down the libertarian message and focus on, you know, right-wing populism instead, and kind of, you know, wedge the libertarian message in on the side as we get a big swath of disaffected voters in there. I thought that's what he's doing, but now I don't see it, I think. And so we were all attracted to it. You know, I get it. I get why you were, because I was too.
Yeah. But where I was going with that was more or less. So like I say, I didn't really know Maxime Bernier, you know, from a hole in the ground. I mean, maybe tacitly because he was a conservative guy and you get a little bit of attention there, but I didn't know the guy really. I just knew that he was saying the things. And, I typically, right, try to initially, as with most people I deal with in my life, or I should say all people I deal with in my life, I'll initially treat you with respect and dignity until you give me reason to otherwise. So I thought, okay, we're going to see about this stuff. And like I say, interviewed dozens of candidates. I became a founding member. I talked with other, members. I had, thousands and thousands of people that were all congregating to talk about this stuff and get into this thing. And I thought, okay, you know
Exciting.
what? This is a great thing. Something is actually happening. But as it got closer to election day, and then once it came and passed, and Maxime had lost this, what I found right away was like it seemed like we all had created this somewhat of a big tent of like even as Bruce's suggestion, like the virtue and the freedom people, and it looked like we were trying to create some kind of a big tent. And at the bare minimum, right, it seemed like the four things he was talking about was freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and forget what the fourth one was. But anyways, these were the things at the very least, bare minimum, that we could agree on and be the basis for us to at least show some form of unity. But immediately after the election, and every since, I just can't help but point out the fact that these people had completely forgot that I even exist anymore. So when it comes to the respect thing, right, at bare minimum,
but Bennett, this has happened throughout history, and shame on us for not noticing it, right? I mean, back in the Reform Party days, libertarians were jumping on board with the Reform Party, and they were welcome freedom people to come join us, virtue people. We accept you, right?
Yeah.
Well, they used us for our votes and our support, and then they dumped us, because then they're like, and this was what worries me a little bit about the PPC. If they ever grow to the size the Reform Party grew to, they'll have to make a decision. Okay, we're now really splitting the conservative vote here, and the left, the liberals, are continue winning elections. So maybe we can expand our tent more and bring on all the conservatives, or the progressive conservatives and the red Tories, and and then we got the CPC, right? And one of the first things Harper did was start ousting libertarians, and it culminated in Harper at a Manning conference, just denigrate libertarians and say, they're not welcome in the Conservative Party. Well, again, fool me once, right? But apparently you fooled me twice, and because your boy here, I'm like Charlie Brown with the football, with these conservatives, with these virtue people. People keep holding the football for me, thinking, oh, we're going to play together, and then they pull it away at the last second, and I'm laying on my back,
right?
Destroyed, right?
And that's something that everyone that talks about this stuff has really got to think about is, right, the fool me once, fool me twice. I mean, once again, I've been consistent in my views. I haven't changed, swayed, or done any of that stuff, or backtracked. I'm still exactly I uphold the same principles that I upheld 10 years ago. So that to me is, where do you get to the point if there is going to be this great this expansion of the tent? Is yes, well, who's the one that's actually creating the tent here, right? That's the major issue. Anyways, I wanted to cover just some of this stuff because I know the guys have been in there kind of chopping.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments.
So let me just get back to this for a bit, and then we'll get back into the article. What's this here? So we got Steve Passmore. Hey, welcome to the live stream. There's Stewie, sorry. Is Tim still libertarian leaning? Well, I would suggest you can answer that.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm a libertarian through and through, and cap.
I'll stop typing. Much love and respect. Okay, so now, anyways, so we got Justin Turdo there. I love you guys.
Oh, thanks, Turdo. We love you too.
In a non-gay way. Well, yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I might love you in a little bit of a gay way, but just
all right. Oh, here we go. We got another question here from Stu Passmore. What does a freedom-based country do versus a totalitarian ideology like, what's that?
SLA? Not sure what that is, but
yeah, I'm not sure what that is either.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. What does a freedom-based country look like, right? Well, there's different conceptions of that, even in the libertarian realm, right? Like a minarchist might say it's a night watchman state, which is just the government does courts, police, and military, and the military's job is to protect our borders, to protect our territory, not to engage in peacekeeping and nation building and spreading democracy and fighting terrorists over there and different things like that. It's to strictly keep armies off our soil or keep invaders off our soil. And then you let everything else be, managed and regulated through voluntary association. I'm an anarchist, so I think that once you plant that seed of minarchy, of small government, restrained government, it inevitably grows. It has to, right? And we've seen this experiment. We just look south of the border to the US. I mean, that was arguably the first libertarian minarchist country we've seen in this world. And it was fantastic for quite a while, right? But little by little, over time, that state grew into an empire, and one that is now $34 trillion in debt and has reams of regulation and different things like that. Still one of the best countries on earth to live, but you got to think how much better they would have done had they been able to keep their state, their federal government restrained to its original founding principles. But then so anarchists like myself would say, well, the problem was the original sin of saying this group of people has a special right that no one else does. Right. And so our nations will, a nation for me properly is a group of people bound by a common values, right? And those values, the first value would be liberty. And then you might add some other values onto that too. But ultimately, they're bound together through voluntary means. And you can imagine, private cities who then contract to a territorial defense agency with other private cities to manage, threats, external threats, and different things like that. Dispute resolution would be done through private means and different things. You would have, if you think the market is good at providing goods and services when it's free of government intervention and people can actually compete, then you want government out of all. The most important ones are like defense and security and solving crime and dispute resolution and all those things. So that's where we go. I mean, but that requires a mental hurdle to get around, right? Even for myself, I started out as a minarchist and it took 6 months of reading to become an anarchist, because, you over time realize, well, if our principle is non-aggression and private property, how do we justify government? And I could never wrap my head around that until I started reading how a lot of these things could be done and have been historically done by voluntary association and markets and militias and, different types of arrangements. So once you see historical examples of how a lot of these things were done, then it puts your mind at ease. Like, oh yeah, of course, these, private institutions would do much better than a criminal gang.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in terms of that, I mean, we won't beat that dead horse because it's been, thrashed relentlessly. But anyone has any questions in terms of, well, how could you do X in the absence of the state? Once again, that question has been answered a gazillion times by many, many, many libertarians, right? Every possible scenario that you can think of. And, we need the state, right? Trust me, it's been debunked a multitude of times. But to me, I like to break things down to the most simplest type of ways to think about things. And what I've always kind of resorted to talk to people, no matter what their age range is or their intellectual level, is just think if you were to sit down and play a game with someone, right? Any game, I don't care, board game or, whatever, even if you would have played a hockey or baseball or any kind of a game or sport. I mean, the only reason why you will actively agree and engage in that and participate in that is because you expect, and the rules are consistent and universal for everyone. So, if you're playing, a board game or you're playing hockey, everybody has to follow the same rules. Now, think about this for a second, right? Now, like Tim was alluding to, the founding fathers, they set it up great, and boy, they had like disclaimers and subsection, right? And they set up the rules beautifully. They sounded great, all really good, and seemed to be virtue based, except there was just that one rule where it was like, except everyone has to follow these rules, but we got this one small rule here where, if me and Tim are playing, Bennett and everyone else, we have to follow the rules. But Tim, he gets to have an exemption to follow those rules. Tim can do things that no one else can do in the game, right? So I can't steal any money out of, like, if I'm playing Monopoly, I can't steal any money out of my buddies when he's not looking, right? That would be wrong. But hey, for some reason, Tim
we need an exception to the rule, Bennett, because there's an emergency, right? There's poor people. There's a pandemic. There's invaders, whatever, right? This is how liberty is lost. It's like you create a hobgoblin. 9 times out of 10, it's imaginary, or there's always some truth to it, right? There are poor people, and it does suck. And it's like, it'd be nice to fix that. And if the government just increased spending by 0.5%, and our we barely notice it on our taxes, we could really help a lot of poor people. Don't you guys want to help it? Yeah, I guess we kind of do. Now we've given that little bit of power to the government. Now we've got crack the door open to what's to stop us from going to 2%, and what's to stop us from dealing, solving this other problem, which is also a problem. And we can all see it's a problem. And guys, don't we want to solve that problem? Where are your hearts at? And so eventually it just keeps growing like that, because you have this institution that is, we've agreed, has sole proprietorship, has sole sovereignty to use violence to solve the problem. Well, and this is the difference between a hockey game and the government, right? In a hockey game, yes, we voluntarily agree to a set of rules, and we want those rules. We like rules, and libertarians like rules. But guess what? If we find the game not to our liking anymore, we don't have to play it anymore. We can go start playing a different game. We can secede, right? We don't have that ability to say, it's like, we're now all playing hockey. The refs are in charge of everything, and you can never escape it, and you can never stop playing it. And so, I mean, I like rules, and look, you would have rules in private communities or private cities, right? That you are paying something that looks like a tax every year, but it's a voluntary arrangement. You're signing a contract. It's not a social contract. It's an actual contract. And you say, look, you need to maintain the roads and maintain these services. In exchange, I'll give you an annual fee. And if either of us break our agreement, our contract, we have immediate access to justice, right? If the government isn't, or if the city owner isn't keeping bums off the streets and tent cities and human feces off the streets, then I don't want to live in that city. And they violated their contract with me to keep the streets orderly, right? And so there's going to be rules out there, like you don't pitch a tent in front of a store, and you don't shit on the sidewalk, and you do all these things. Those rules are great, but they're not enforced by a state. They're enforced by a private owner on their property, and in a way that allows a community to flourish through voluntary association.
Right. Well, that's the thing, though. That's kind of the part that's most important, is any of the rules. Like I say, so a game is not the state, but the state also, once again, the rules is that, theft is wrong in terms of the government, like the in terms of whether you're a minarchist or anyone that believes in government at all,
right?
The government is to prevent or protect, and it actually alludes to that as we get further along into this article. Actually, I'll kind of bring it up, but it is to protect, right, you from theft or from violence. But yet, the state is built, right, and based upon using violence and theft as a means to an end. So that to me, once again, like I say, no matter how you look at it at the societal level or at the personal level.
Well, it's like setting up a game where I set up a game, but I'm exempt from the rules, right?
Right.
And that's exactly what it is. Like, and you guys aren't allowed to extort money from each other. You're not allowed to violently extort money from each other. We are, because we're the state. And
so bare minimally, if anyone's listening to this kind of a conversation, bare minimally, I would suggest that the person who is advocating to give themselves or people they align with the exemption, those are the people you need to be more concerned with. That to me is the thing. So whether, like I say, whether you're someone that's from the virtue side of things, the freedom side of things, or somewhere tazily in the middle, or just trying to figure out your lot in life or where you place yourself, is at bare minimum, right? At bare minimum, you should at least look to see is who are the people who are actually being consistent in their views, their ideas, or their principles. Because the minute that someone is, once again, seeking an exemption from the rules, I mean, I just like Tim kind of suggested, and I won't say 100% that you don't know their intentions. There's no way that you can know. But at the very least, there should be something that you should be questioning by sheer fact that they're expecting or wanting to be exempted from the rules that everyone else got to follow.
Yeah.
But anyways,
Yeah,
Tim, we're going to continue on here, like I say, because we got a few
Okay.
more minutes to get through, but let's just get through a little bit more here.
Virtues, they believe, are for individuals to work out for themselves. The primary accomplishment of the West, they would say, is individual autonomy. The purpose of government is to secure individual rights to liberty.
So I guess we kind of, let me get back there just a little bit here, because I think I might have missed it.
To work out for themselves.
Yeah, right here. Okay.
They believe that freedom is the most important thing. Virtues, they believe, are for individuals to work out for themselves. The primary accomplishment of the West, they would say, is individual autonomy. The purpose of government is to secure.
So this is suggesting now that the freedom types, right? And what it sounds to me, and I actually wrote this down as well, is so the freedom people are saying you should have your individual freedoms respected to the point where that you can create your own virtues and adhere to them yourself. So in other words, what that sounds to me and how he's saying that is just like me that raised my children, right? I don't want to have to, constantly be looking over their shoulders or standing over, peering over their shoulders every day to make sure they're doing everything right, ethically, and being upstanding, moral, decent people, right? No, what it is, I hope I've instilled proper principles and ethics in them that I no longer need to do that they become adults, right? And that is a big distinguishing factor between freedom people and the virtue people. Is I'm more than willing to allow adults to mature and become adults and live as adults and be held accountable for the decisions or the things they do as adults.
Yeah. And what he's doing here is he's contrasting what virtue people say the West is built on, which is, the virtue people say the West is built on tradition, faith, family, responsibility, all these virtues. And freedom people like us say that the West, the key distinction of the West from all other previous civilizations is the commitment to protecting individual autonomy, and that the government, to the degree it's legitimate, is there to secure those rights, not impose on them. And I think that, frankly, we're right. I mean, all these things have existed through all cultures and governments and totalitarian states. They all have commitments to traditions and faith, traditions and family and different things like that, a lot of them. But the key difference in the West has been, starting from Magna Carta, where we start to recognize that the individual is a sacrosanct unit of society, and moving up through the Enlightenment and through, the Declaration of Independence and some of these constitutional documents that recognize the individual. That's what makes the West great, is the commitment to the individual and protecting the individual. And that hadn't existed before. Now, you can argue, and I would probably agree with this, Jordan Peterson would probably say, that where did that commitment to the individual come from? From what tradition? Well, it probably came out of the tradition of Christianity and Protestantism, where we moved away from the church being the all-powerful, in control of your salvation, to now it's up to the individual to determine whether to seek heaven or hell. Right. And that the spark of the divine is located within the individual, not within the church, but within the individual. Yeah. You can accept Jesus or reject him. It's up to the individual. And out of that then came a commitment to individual rights. Sure. That could be true, but let's not get it twisted. We're not a theocracy. We were the distinguishing feature of the left was that commitment to the individual as the sacrosanct unit of society. And yes, I think that the virtue people have a lot a lot of good things to say about faith. As we lose our faith in God, we replace it with faith in the state, right? And the state becomes our non-corporeal entity that we worship and give our petitions to and sing our hymns to the state, our national anthems and all these things. You know, so as families disintegrate, the state becomes more powerful. And as personal responsibility disintegrates, the state becomes more powerful. All these things are true. Without tradition, faith, family, all these dignity, community, and faith, we can't defend liberty. That's true. But let's not forget the very thing that we're trying to defend. That's liberty. That's the individual. That's as the sacrosanct, that, and all these things protect it, but they aren't, they aren't what distinguish the West. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the thing, because when they talk about this, because I did want to kind of emphasize this as well. So when Bruce is talking about freedom people versus virtue people, I just wanted to kind of add in, and that's why I had Tim on as well, is because I think that we would consider that there's actually, we represent a kind of a third group, right, to this thing, because really when you're talking about the freedom versus virtue people, and as Bruce alludes to, at which we're going to get to in the article here. Actually, let me play it, and then I'll get to it.
Sure.
Okay.
Individual rights to liberty. Freedom means the absence of coercion. You may decide your values, actions, and groups for yourself. Freedom means freedom from. Virtue people believe in freedom too, especially in this era of a liberal progressivism. But freedom means a different thing to them. Freedom is essential, they would say, but the decline of the West is due to an excessive emphasis on individual.
Oh, actually, no, I kind of went too far. So basically, like he was suggesting, that there is that the freedom people believe that government is basically, like you were saying, like the night watchman state. So basically the ideas of the founding fathers. The thing with libertarians like ourselves, that philosophical libertarians or anarchists, more properly described, is that we're just the ones that are more consistent and figured out through, not just trial and error, but time itself, that yes, giving people the pretense of authority over others, that is the basis. Whether how long it takes, how it plays out, nobody can predict the future, but that's the basis for creating this space that is now so dominant, where there are people, if you get a large enough group of people together, now you can become the dominant gang in your particular jurisdiction, or country. And that's the area where we libertarians actually even have disagreements with our fellow libertarians in terms of minarchists, is we've seen the rise of the state, like you alluded to earlier with the US. It went from the smallest government on the planet to now like basically one of the largest that has ever existed. So that's the other area where I think we should kind of emphasize as well, is yes, there's freedom and virtue people, but there's also another kind of category of people like you and I, who definitely see ourselves as fellow travelers in a multitude of ways with both of these groups. But we just really what it comes down to, and this is not a dig, it's just, I find it something that's just being more consistent, right? And adhering to those morals or ethics or principles that are espoused regardless of either whether they come from the virtue people or the freedom people, is being, strict adherence to these principles. Because the minute you're just willy-nilly or loose with your principles, then we see how that is the area where things start to degrade.
Right.
Now,
and he makes a point here that virtue people see the decline of the West is due to excess emphasis on individuality, right? And I've heard this a lot from these type of people. We need to focus on the nation, not the individual. We need to focus. Well, I think there's a legitimate criticism there from them that there is a lot of that. There's a lot of focus on freedom, but not responsibility, right? And libertarians, I think that we focus a lot on freedom as well, and maybe we need to focus more on the responsibility side of things. But what we're seeing here is freedom to do what I want, but not pay the consequences, right? And that's what the type of individuality I think that is legitimate to criticize, and they're right in doing that. But that the answer is not to then prohibit and impose on the individual, because now you are undermining the very foundation of Western civilization.
Yeah, well, that's like I say. Well, the freedom thing. So the freedom people, and it even said within the article, we just kind of skipped it over, or we heard it, but rather than trying to find it again. So it was freedom means the absence of coercion, and this is the area where, like I say, and that's that whole thing that most libertarians, I shouldn't say all for sure, but that 6-month thing, right? So the minute someone tells you freedom means the absence of coercion, no matter which side of that divide you fall yourself on, well, just using logic and reason and consistency in your thinking, right? That tells you, well, okay, if you're telling me that coercion is the absence, or freedom is the absence of coercion, well, then how do you square that thing with but you're advocating for the state, because the state is coercion by its very nature. So this is the area.
Yes, but Bennett, there's always a but there. Freedom, yes, I agree with you. Freedom from coercion, but in this one area, you have to admit we need something. We can't have this, right?
Right.
And that's what we hear all the time from these people. Yes, I agree with you largely, but this thing, right? And so that but is that's why we are where we're at. That but,
Yeah.
And I hate big butts, and I cannot lie. Anyways.
Yeah. And the other part, actually, I think I'll play that part. So here we go.
But freedom means a different thing to them. Freedom is essential, they would say, but the decline of the West is due to an excessive emphasis on individuality. If that makes perfect sense to you, you may be a virtue person. If it sounds like a contradiction, you are probably a freedom person. Freedom, they would say, means the disciplining of desire, which requires limits.
Oh, wait now. So actually, no, I went a little too far.
An excessive emphasis on individuality. This era of a liberal progressivism. But freedom means a different thing to them. Freedom is essential, they would say, but the decline of the West is due to an excessive emphasis on individuality. If that makes perfect sense to you, you may be a virtue person. Oh. You may decide your values, actions, and groups for yourself.
Actually, I can't find it right now. But anyways, it was freedom to and freedom from. So those are the two things that, like I say, I want to point out the difference here. So yes, so freedom to and freedom from, I would suggest, is the same thing. When libertarians are talking about this stuff, really what it comes down to us and the kind of vernacular we use is negative rights versus positive rights, right? So basically, libertarians and even minarchists share that same thing in terms of, for the most part.
It's not even that. It's not even that. In the article here, what he says here, I'll read the paragraph. Freedom, they would say, means the disciplining of desires, which requires limits. Freedom is a liberation to act responsibly, to be transcendent, and to flourish virtuously. We become free, they would say, to the extent that our will becomes coherent with objective good. Freedom means freedom too, right? And this is again, there's a kernel of truth here, Bennett, because I subscribe to the idea, the Jocko Willink idea that discipline equals freedom, right? Delaying gratification now and doing the hard thing now leads to more freedom in the future. But again, you must also discipline the desire to want to control people. That's the first discipline you have to subscribe to, right? You do not transcend, you do not flourish, you do not become virtuous if you are looking for a shortcut to virtue by imposing your will on other people. And that's where the virtue people fall short. That's their original sin.
Yeah. Well, I agree. That's the thing with the freedom to and freedom from. Yes. Well, I mean, once again, it comes down to how consistent are you in your application of that particular principle. And this is the area, once again, where the populace, they talk a good talk, but they're more than willing to, prevent people from doing a lot of things. And actually, that's the area I might as well continue on, because that's the area where we're going to get to right here.
West is due to an excessive emphasis on individuality. If that makes perfect sense to you, you may be a virtue person. If it sounds like a contradiction, you are probably a freedom person. Freedom, they would say, means the disciplining of desire, which requires limits. Freedom is the liberation to act responsibly, to be transcended, and to flourish virtuously. We become free, they would say, to the extent that our will becomes coherent with objective good. Freedom means freedom too. In the political sphere, these two kinds of freedom are incompatible. Freedom people expect their governments to keep the peace and protect the individual and otherwise to not interfere. Virtue people expect their governments to promote the good with laws and policies. Virtue people support laws that prohibit behavior that is, in their view, immoral, damaging to human flourishing, or inconsistent with common good. Assisted suicide, prostitution, divorce, pornography, even heresy, just to start, shall not be permitted.
So there we go. Are some of the things that the virtue people would suggest, and this is definitely something that separates the libertarians, the freedom people, from the virtue people. Is so the things that they were bringing up, like pornography, prostitution. These are the things that I would suggest we libertarians share in common, or some of us, not all. This is the thing, right? I personally speak for myself. I think prostitution is a bad idea. I think, being addicted to porn is not good, right? Those things I would agree with the virtue people. The difference between me and a virtue people is, I don't want to impose my will. I would love to talk to the person that has these vices, right? And explain to them the follies that come from that, and how it can be a real detriment to your own personal life. Forget about everyone else that it might affect. For your own personal life, it will have detrimental effects. And the kind of people that are going to want to amalgamate or surround themselves with you if you live in that kind of a space, or that's what dominates your time. But I would tell them, my thing is, I would tell you that I disagree with that and your lifestyle. And I really think you should do better, not just for yourself, but for others that may care about you. But the buck stops for me in terms of, I'm not going to use violence, and I'm not going to use force, and I'm not going to coerce that person into making different decisions, because what I acknowledge first and foremost is pornography, watching pornography. Well, it's not a great thing, especially if you're doing it in an obsessive form, but that person is not using violence, right? They're at least, with the kind of morals and ethics that I hold near and dear, they're at least adherent to most of them. They're not forcing themselves on anyone. It's a voluntary thing. So even though I disagree with it, buck stops for me is, I'm not going to force you or create a law or legislation or policy to prevent you from looking at porn, or from, a girl or a woman becoming a prostitute. Whereas the virtue people,
or even a man from becoming a prostitute.
yes, exactly. Right. Exactly. We got to be inclusive here.
Well, and listen, I've written about this stuff, and assisted suicide is listed there too, right? I have serious concerns with all these things. And I've written an article about how assisted suicide program in Canada is an absolute gong show of a tragedy. And, it's not the assisted suicide itself per se that is the problem, but it's how it's being administered, how it's the only solution that the government seems to offer, how our healthcare system has failed us because of, guess what? It's run by the state. And so we have very limited options and long lines. So people who are in desperate need can't get the care that they need. So they, again and again, are resorting to taking a lethal injection from the state. And that's absolutely horrific. And so, when you look at things like prostitution, again, how do you think the state involvement in the family, in family law, in marriage licensing, in all these, the welfare state, how do you think that contributes to prostitution? We know that fatherless homes, which are huge in under the state, because the state wants to become the provider for the family, right? It doesn't like husbands, it doesn't like responsible fathers, and so it tries to get those guys marginalized and out of the family life. And so you end up with an epidemic of fatherless homes, where there's a 400% increased rate of of pregnancy, of drug addiction, of criminality, of having to resort to lives like prostitution. You know, you when you talk about pornography, it's like, okay, why are people consuming, not just pornography, but Netflix and social media and all these things that kind of numb the mind and keep them focused on mindless consumption rather than taking responsibility in their life. Again, there's a myriad of forces here at work that keep us isolated from our community, that keep us disengaged. We've outsourced our personal responsibility. I don't have to worry about my neighbor who's suffering because the state will take care of them. I don't have to contribute anything. If I'm a degenerate, I'm rewarded because I will get a steady paycheck from the state and be allowed to engage in degeneracy and never have to take personal responsibility. And so, of course, all these vices grow and get larger when you hand over control to the state. And so that's again where the virtue people are missing the forest for the trees, and they keep handing things over to the state and expecting the state to make their communities and their nation more virtuous. Well, that hasn't been working. In fact, it's been doing the opposite of working. So maybe you should stop that, and all these things you're concerned about will suddenly become much less of a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like it was alluded to. So it says virtue people support laws that prohibit behavior that they consider immoral or not supporting the common good. My question that I put underneath of that to remind myself was, well, who defines the common good, considering violence, force, and theft is considered a legitimate means to an end to these people in the virtue side? So that's well,
of course, and then that's what you get, Bennett, right? Exactly. Who determines the common good? And that's what politics is all about, is fighting about who should determine. I mean, everyone agrees that the state should determine the common good, but who should be in control of the state, right? And so everyone is focused on this fight, and this is, this is where the culture wars come from. This is what my concern with the culture wars is, that they're focused on the wrong sort of culture. They're focused on who should control the common good, who should impose their will on others, rather than the real culture war that exists is libertarian versus authoritarian, right? Yeah. And disabusing people of that. But so it distracts people from focusing on what actually works.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So another part I said in there, I'm not sure if we already went by it or if it's coming up, but so every legal rule, and we've discussed this ourselves and many times in the past and with other people. So every legal rule is the state using force to bend the will of the people. And once again, I just can't help but emphasize the fact that, so let's use the prostitution thing as an example, right? So, I mean, so the prostitute doing something that I think we would both agree is probably not the best thing ever for that person, but who am I to say, I don't know that person's situation. There might be, it might be an act of desperation. Who's to know what the motives is behind it? But once again, so by sheer fact that someone's doing something, so for the virtue person, their idea is, so this person is doing something that I consider to be immoral. And what is my answer to a person doing something immoral? But that's the thing. They consider it immoral, but that person, once again, them and their John, right? It's going to be a voluntary thing, right? Because if there's a crime takes place, well, that's a different scenario. But if it's just a John and a prostitute having sex, doing their thing, well, you may disagree with it, but what's the answer to the person that's claiming to be virtuous, right? The answer to two people having consensual sex with a monetary transaction taking place, the answer to that is for me to what? Steal a portion of their income for the next so long by something that we would call a fine, right? Or to maybe possibly escalate up to the point where we might throw them in a cage for a small amount of time or an indefinite period of time. Well, to me, that seems like a massive amount of escalation. So if you consider the act of prostitution immoral, and I would definitely suggest that it's not something that I would say is a behavior that I would personally condone for, let's say, if it was my daughter, right, or something like that. No, but once again, it's the response, it's the answer. If your answer is that virtue, that person is being unvirtuous, if your answer is to be even worse, right, and less virtuous than them, well, isn't that how you end up in this modern society that we live in today, where we
Right.
got a gazillion laws. That's the thing that everyone's got to keep in mind and in context as well. If you knew the thousands upon thousands, there's laws that is supposed to, regulate, control, and manipulate what people do in society. And I personally have seen, and everyone has observed, nobody can deny that the more numerous the laws that have been accumulating and growing for decades and decades on end has only culminated to a society that seems worse off than ever.
Yeah,
So
all the negative unintended consequences.
right,
Yeah.
at bare
Well-
minimum, your strategy, even if you think your there's utility in your strategy, well, reality itself should at least make you or cause you to question that.
Right. Well, and let's not, again, I come back to, yes, are the laws working? Are all these things working? Right. And you talked about daughters, right? Now, my daughters will never be prostitutes. There was never any danger of them ever
Right.
even considering that. Yet, had they grown up in a different household, that might have been their career path, right? And why? Why is it? Why is it that in my household, it's not a career path, and in another household, and I can guarantee you that other household where that becomes a real possibility for them is one where the state has its evil little hands all over it, right? It's probably subsidized, a household subsidized by the state. It's a household that has been torn apart by the state, by family law, by the state's involvement in marriage. And so now your solution, and so you have this horrific upbringing that this girl has been raised in, state subsidized, where the best possible career choice for them is prostitute, selling their badge for money, right? Absolutely horrific choice. But what are her other choices? So now your solution is you're going to ban that choice that you see as horrible, and it is, but it's her best choice. I mean, it's her life, and she doesn't see any other alternatives, and there aren't any other alternatives that are realistic for someone who's coming out of that environment. Now you've removed the one thing that she can do. Now what's she going to do? And have you fixed her life in any way? Have you improved the situation? No, you had a hand in making that woman a whore because of your insistence that the state impose virtues and be heavily involved in marriage.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. And especially when you talk about libertarians and the philosophy of liberty, is because another part that it was alluding to is that the freedom people, and some of them can be, right, because that's in the absence of coercion, can people become decadent, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And can some of them be more hedonistic than others? You could suggest that if it wasn't for the thing. Here's the thing. If it wasn't for the fact that the philosophy of liberty, it actually, that's the one thing that I've always said is the non-aggression principle. That's the beautiful thing, is doesn't guarantee virtue, but at the very least is it keeps us on an even keel in terms of, how we treat each other, which creates that genuine respect for each other. And I think would be more conducive with creating a genuinely prosperous and free society, is because, yes, people could be decadent, but the non-aggression, I mean, the kind of decadence that you may entertain or dive into at the very least, well, under the philosophy of liberty, the only thing or only one that's going to be it's going to be destructive too is going to be yourself. So when libertarians are talking about, the philosophy of liberty and the non-aggression principle, well, the non-aggression principle is already that baseline, right? That right. Little thing that even when we were kids, don't hit, don't steal from people, right? So that's already a pretty good basis to at least, keep people somewhat away from these kind of hedonistic lifestyles. Now, once again, there are things that you can do that would be hedonistic or considered, not the greatest thing like prostitution. But once again, bare minimally, the person that you're hurting in that particular example, and libertarians, philosophical libertarians, and most people would say, I don't think you should harm yourself that way. Just say it's no different than if they were sitting there with a razor blade cutting the wrist. I think it's a bad thing for you to call harming yourself. But
and it's also a bad thing Bennett, to subsidize that. And that, what do you think is going to happen when you get the state involved? Right?
Yep.
They're going to subsidize. Are they going to subsidize personal
How
responsibility
would you be able to do drugs
and
in the
complete
playground if
independence?
the Supreme Court didn't say it was completely okay to do so?
Are they going to subsidize actualized, autonomous, independent individuals who don't need the state? Or are they going to subsidize things that make people absolutely helpless and dependent on the state? So of course, you ask the state to do things. It's never going to subsidize your virtues that you virtue people want. It's not in the interest of the state to do that. It doesn't. And so it's always and only ever going to lean towards subsidizing degeneracy. That's it, because it's a degenerate thing, and it requires degeneracy to support it. It requires the outsourcing of responsibility and the abdicating of personal responsibility, and so of course you get more degeneracy when you have a state. It can't not be degenerate.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Tim, I'm going to continue on here, get her playing a little more.
You want me to just read it, Bennett?
What's that? Sorry?
Do you want me to just read it? Or
well, that's fine. If you want to read it, go ahead.
Okay. To achieve their ends, virtue people rely on force. At least that's what freedom people would say. Virtue people use laws to achieve their ends, and laws depend on force. Every legal rule identifies a circumstance in which the state will bend the will of its citizens. Without the monopolistic violence of the state, laws cannot be enforced. Virtue people are willing to use that force to achieve their virtuous ends. Therefore, allege the freedom people, they are willing to use force to have their way. Freedom people are decadent. At least that's what virtue people would say. If morality crimes do not exist and individuals are free to decide their own values, depravity ensues. Libertarians and libertines are cousins, virtue people would declare. Excessive individualism causes indulgence, narcissism, and social decay. But freedom people can be virtuous too. They can embrace faith, family, and community. They can disapprove of behavior such as prostitution that virtue people would ban. However, freedom people make a distinction that virtue people are unwilling or unable to make. Freedom people see two different questions where virtue people see only one. How should people behave? How must they behave? For freedom people, the first is philosophical and personal. The second is legal and coercive. The answer to the first does not answer the second. Freedom people do not impose their moral judgments on others. They will not have others impose upon them. Paradoxically, freedom people have faith that virtue people lack. They have faith in spontaneous order. If we leave people alone, they say, things will turn out fine. Individual decisions will coalesce into peace and prosperity. Virtue people do not believe in spontaneous order. They want their hands on the wheel so that they can manage people to virtuous ends. But freedom people will not be managed. They believe that the West's problems is too little liberty. Virtue people believe that the problem is too much. Freedom people oppose the administrative state. Virtue people embrace it if it directs people to proper ends. Neither will sign on to the other's project. Although they cooperate to resist the tyranny of the woke, they are not likely to succeed unless they reconcile. At the gathering, most people were virtue people. The few freedom people present slowly realized that they attended a kind of church to which they did not belong. The virtue people who filled the room, steadfast in their convictions that they knew best what is right and good, did not seem to be aware of them, or for that matter, that they existed at all. Near the end, I spoke with an earnest, soft-spoken gentleman in horn-rimmed glasses. In his ideal world, the law would prohibit behavior that conflicted with the good as he perceived it. When I pointed out that some people in the room would oppose that enterprise with all their might, his mouth fell open and his eyes grew wide behind his thick lenses. That possibility had not occurred to him. Not everyone sees the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I did just to clarify things for people too, because in that article, it said that libertarians and libertines are cousins. Well, I mean, right off the top of my head is, what does that really even mean at the end of the day? I've got lots of cousins in this.
Sure.
There's all kinds of difference
Yeah.
between us, but just for people who maybe aren't familiar. So a libertine is a person, especially a man. This is a dictionary definition of it. A person, especially a man, who behaves without moral principles or a sense of responsibility, especially in sexual matters. Now, a libertarian obviously is an advocate or supporter of a political philosophy that advocates only minimal state intervention in the free market and the private lives of citizens. So,
Right.
I mean, cousins,
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
third or
look,
fourth.
there's a kernel of truth there in that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of libertines that get attracted to the libertarian movement, right? They see, like, for example, my slogan that got me all the attention. I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. It's like, okay, if I'm a guy that loves to smoke weed and loves to do drugs and just loves to be a playboy, shit, this is the party for me. This is the philosophy for me to let me do whatever I want. I can finally be the hedonist I've always wanted. Hell yeah, sign me up, bro. Well, okay, that is a libertine, and they're attracted to libertarianism because they see freedom. And so I can see why virtue people would be would look at libertarians. They'd see that guy blabbing about libertarianism and note that he's a libertine and associate the two. Of course, right? And that's why we need to be louder voices than those in the movement that just want freedom to do drugs and stuff. We're advancing. What we're doing here is equivalent to what abolitionists did, to end slavery. We see an immoral, evil institution, and we want it to go in the dustbin of history. And some people, are again, they just want to be able to, be free to smoke their meth or whatever. But then they get attracted to the movement. And so, yeah, it's a challenge, I think, that we have to recognize and overcome. And the one thing that this article has really made me think about is, how do I reach across the aisle and find common ground and reconcile with the virtue people? And I've had some experience with this, Bennett, because when I ran in 2015 in a riding in Calgary, I had a large contingent of social conservatives, virtue people, supporting me. Now, they saw my slogan, I want gay married couples, marijuana plants, blah, blah, blah. And that immediately turned them off. But these people gave me 5 minutes of their time because the conservative candidate was so terrible that they're like, we don't want to support this conservative guy. He's a red Tory. This kid seems like he's making a lot of good points, but we're concerned about this one thing. And I just talked to them, and in 5 minutes, I alleviated their fears, and they agreed with me. They agreed with me that, yes, you're right. The state hasn't made these virtues better. Yes, you're right. People need to be free to choose heaven or hell on their own terms and accept the consequences. And we shouldn't have the state impose their will. We agree. It didn't take much to convince them at all. And so, but now the question is, how do we do that en masse? How do we accelerate that reconciliation and get these people on our side and saying, yes, we can be ultra conservative, social conservative people, but also libertarian, and recognize that libertarianism is actually the best path forward to the socially conservative world that we long for.
Yeah. Well, in the absence of the marketplace of ideas, which is what the virtue people are leaving, right? That's what they're leaving behind when they leave voices like yours or ours out of the equation, or mine out of the equation. Because once again, the accusations, and just like you alluded to, yes, some libertines may initially find some common space in the liberty movement. But once again, if in Canadian context in particular, for me and yourself, which I would suggest are two fairly prominent in terms of Canadian context anyways, libertarians, is, you're a married man, you have daughters, and you're a committed guy, you work hard, you're a paramedic and a volunteer firefighter. I mean, these are all things that I think are great things, for anyone to do in society. And then of course you take someone like myself. I've been with my wife for 33 years. We got 2 great sons that are, doing well and never got themselves in any trouble. So to me, what I would suggest, rather than the virtue people, rather than clobber the libertine, because the libertines, the decadents, the people who are going to have virtues and vice and going to be hedonistic in some way, they're going to always exist in society.
Sure.
What I would offer, rather than, I'm sure you would do the same, is rather than beat them or clobber them over the head and expecting that's going to change their outlook on life, or how they're going to carry themselves or present themselves, or how they're going to act out their life, is I choose to lead by example. And I've done that with my own children, right? Rather than beating my kids into submission, I was wise enough to realize that that's only not going to work. I've watched parents try to do that, and once the kids are big enough either to stand in front of your face and you're not going to be able to hit them because they're bigger you are, or they just leave the home, well, then you've lost all control entirely. That's why I don't seek to use control or force as the means to an end. What I want to do is make sure that I've done my job, and I've been responsible enough in my own life and led by that example. And not just that I led by example, but shown the fruits of my labor and how good that is for me, and how it has been for me, in addition to even them, because they got to experience that. That's all that was needed. No force necessary. Right now, that's not going to guarantee perfection. And that's one thing libertarians have said basically since I've been listening. Don't expect perfection. There is never going to be. We're never going to reach that utopia, and nor would I ever expect or believe that will be the case. I can hope. Anyone can hold out hope and faith that society, or the world, is going to do better at that macro level. But once again, it's about leading by example rather than using force. And at bare minimum, for the people that the virtue crowd is, maybe you're not familiar with this particular way of doing things. Well, once again, at the very least, be willing to engage in that marketplace of idea. Because I assure you, there are things that people like us, the freedom crowd, got to bring to the table that will not just benefit the people that you want to see improve or do better in society, but even yourself. Because really, at the end of the day, when I looked out there at how am I going to change society, how am I going to fix things, how am I going to bring about liberty? Well, I had to look in the mirror first and foremost. And that's where it started. And if people would just choose to do that, and once again, bare minimally, no matter where you rest or reside on that spectrum, just be willing to engage in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that, and that alone, is going to be the foundation or the baseline that we're going to need and require to get ourselves at least somewhat out of the mess or the quagmire we currently find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, look, it's you hit on an important topic, right? Peaceful parenting. I made the same commitment to my kids. It's right, and that doesn't mean we don't ever use force, but you use it in a protective way. If some kid's running out on the street, yeah, of course you grab them and haul them back, but you don't take them afterwards and inflict pain on them after the fact, right? You have a conversation, and you try to get to the root of the problem and try to figure out, okay, why did he think it was okay to run out on the street, and how can we prevent this from the future? We get them to internalize how to be an actualized owned person, right? We don't want him to avoid running out in the street because he might get a spanking or get hit by a parent. We want him to avoid running on the street for the right reasons, because it's dangerous, because there's cars zipping up and down. We want him to internalize that message. And it's the same for all their decisions in kids, right? And of course, when you have kids that are raised with threat of punishment, threat of infliction of pain, they are going to be prime candidates for supporting the state. They're either going to want to be the authoritarian, so they're the ones that are inflicting the pain and the punishment, or they're going to not be able to know how to function without the threat of force being imposed on them from above.
Yeah. Well, those two questions that he put basically to the end, and this is the part where, once again, but this could only happen in the presence of an actual conversation or dialogue between someone that claims to be from the virtue crowd and a freedom crowd person, is how should people behave, and two, how must they behave? So the virtue crowd is, they just perceive it as how must they hate. They want to bend the will of the
Right.
people, as I alluded to earlier. Whereas we libertarians, we see two questions in that. The freedom types is, and I agree, how should people behave? Of course. And me
Right.
and Tim just basically laid it out in certain examples and using
Yeah.
certain particular examples of prostitution or maid or things like that. So we agree, and we both agree. That's the thing. We both agree that we don't think those are good things. But there's a difference between us and saying you shouldn't do those things, but I'm not willing to use violence, force,
Right.
coercion, or theft to prevent you from doing those things.
Well, yeah, and it's even further than that, right? It's how people should behave, and then how must they behave. And the virtue people say they must behave a certain way. They see someone doing something absolutely disgusting and say, well, that needs to be abolished. But here's another thing that happens. Again, the virtue people who are all about personal responsibility outsource the responsibility to deal with that to the state, right? They're not the ones that are going to go over there and use force and get that person to stop doing whatever they don't like. If they did that, I could actually respect them a little bit more, right? But instead of doing that, instead of using the force themselves and suffering the consequences of whether they made the right or wrong decision there, they're not even going to, that's a dirty job for the hitman I hired called the government to deal with, right? And again, if I could have one thing for the virtue people, it's like, how is that working for you? Do you think that having this gang of individuals who has rights and a mandate that you and I, if we were to do them, would be considered violent criminals? Would you expect that group of people with that mandate and that nucleus of organization to support virtue or to support the things that support it? Depravity, vice, short-term gratification, lack of autonomy, lack of independence, complete and total. It wants people to be afraid and anxious and completely helpless. That's what it wants. That's what gives it its life. That's what gives criminal organizations their life. And, to support that in any way is to destroy the enterprise you care about.
Yeah. Well, I also will add too, because there was another thing that was said in the article. So freedom people have faith in spontaneous order. Well, I would actually suggest that it's actually and it took a little bit of this is the thing. So this is where, like I say, the market of ideas and bringing them all to the forefront in your mind and having a multitude of people and perspectives, being able to figure this stuff out. So I would say it would be more along the lines of something like objectivists like Ayn Rand, or even some prominent libertarians would suggest, it's more about the rational self-interest. I think that libertarians acknowledge. It's not that we just magically think that people are just all going to be good and order's just going to spontaneous. It's just that people have rational self-interest, right?
Well, and personally, I don't even care if there's spontaneous order, right? Because to me, it's freedom. It's not worth the price, even if it's a little bit chaotic. But lately I've always looked at libertarianism not through a set of positive beliefs in something, but more as an attitudinal disposition of skepticism towards extraordinary claims about the use of violence, right?
Yes.
And so I'm not saying necessarily that there's going to be a spontaneous order that's beautiful. What I'm saying is I'm very skeptical of the claims on the other side that in order for there to be order and the good, we need a violent gang to point guns and threaten to shoot people and lock people in cages and do all these violent things. I am very skeptical of that claim. In fact, I think the opposite is going to happen. I think that's going to create chaos and disorder, and not the good that you are telling me it is. And by the way, the burden of proof is on you. You're the one that's advocating, making an extraordinary claim and advocating for violence. All I'm saying is, I don't want that. I disagree with that. I don't think you should do that. I'm not making really any more claim than that.
Yeah. Well, that I agree with you. That's the part where the script really has to get flipped on the virtue types is let's deal with the hypothetical situations, scenarios that they constantly, and the straw mans that they're thrown at libertarians all the time. Oh, how terrible this libertarian society could possibly be, in the absence of, this monopolistic force of violence and coercion and theft, how terrible things will be. Well, how about we just deal with the very real fact that the rise of the state to the point where it has its tentacles in every area of our social and economic lives. It's permeated it into our culture to the point where you basically can't escape it. And that just happened to coincide with the time where things are perceivably at the worst, no matter who you're talking to, because that's the other thing we all got to keep in mind. Not just the virtue people, not just the freedom people, not just the philosophically minded libertarians like ourselves, but what about all these people that we perceive as the woke globalists? Everyone, without exception of them, no matter who you're talking about, are all, raising their hands up in the air and screaming about all the grievances they have and how terrible society is for everybody. Everybody's complaining. So bare minimally, should we not, at the very least, maybe perk our ears and listen to the people who are at least offering something different rather than maintain the status quo? Because the status quo, how things have been done for the virtue crowd or anyone else that has been playing the globalists, right? Because they've been implementing their policies, right? All of this has only culminated to more and more people being more miserable, right? And less people flourishing in society. So bare minimally, right? At least, right, that old adage, I'm not sure if it can properly be attributed to Einstein or not, but, the definition of insanity, repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Well, like we libertarians, and I mean, we got the Milei down in Argentina at bare minimally. Now that's at the political level, but he's trying to bring the culture along with him, I guess, in some way, right? But let maybe allow for some experimentation to take place. Maybe some of the virtue people, maybe if you're scared to death of libertarians leaving people alone, maybe just allow for a little bit of that dialogue and engagement to happen, or maybe some of that to actually take place in the real world and see how that actually unfolds. Because I think most of us know that the majority of our lives, actually, we live and we prefer to live in the state of anarchy without having rulers. People claim to want rulers, but if you just talk to them, usually what it is they think that their ideas are good enough that they should be able to impose them on others. But the minute you flip the script on them, well, they don't want someone else to be ruling over them. So do they really agree on the concept of having a ruler? No, it's just their idea, just like the virtue people is, well, if I get my people in there, right, that's the problem at the end of the day. And we should, at bare minimum, be trying something new, because I find ourselves living in the state of the world today where it's the Ptolemaic system believers, right, are the ones that are the dominant voices, right? And, I consider myself the modern day Galileo, right? So sure, you can reject me, or not necessarily me, but the ideas of the philosophy of liberty. So sure, you can.
So you believe in a globe? You're a globalist?
Yeah, right on. But that's really what it comes down to. The end of the day is for all of these people, and this is an area, like I say, we need to actively engage in the marketplace of ideas, because I firmly believe not in the benevolence of the people or that the spontaneous order, but I do believe, based on rational self-interest, and people just we all have the brain and the capacity to think critically about these things. I believe that the marketplace idea, just like in the marketplace for products and service, I think, that is the place where the best rises to the top, if allowed to actually flourish.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, look, there's a lot of work we can do, right? I mean, we can point the finger at the virtue people and say, you this and that. But I think what we should be doing is thinking about how can we connect with these people? How can we, talk with them and have a dialogue and change their mind, or at least let them see that they just need to go one step further, that they have all the right ideas. They're beautiful ideas: faith, virtue, family, your personal responsibility. And let's take those seriously. And not abdicate our personal responsibility to the government. Let's not abdicate these things. Let's not engage in vice when it comes to statism. This violates the core tenets of do unto others as you would have unto yourself. We got to speak their language, and we got to strike the root. And to me, it's not about talking about outcomes, about pragmatism, about spontaneous order would emerge and this would happen in a libertarian. It's about looking at the very value system that they hold dear and showing them how it actually meshes and is very compatible, and in fact, maybe even necessary to be a libertarian if you hold those values.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Well, anyways, Tim, I think we pretty much covered that really well.
Yeah.
We're just over 2 hours there now. And like I said, I really appreciate you coming on and helping me to cover this. And I really appreciate Bruce Party for putting this article out. And he's doing lots of great work out there behind the scenes and talking about really important ideas himself. And maybe I'll reach out to him someday to have a conversation, actually. And because like I say, this is the area where I think we may be getting there, right? Because the populism, well, I don't know about this year, because the populism thing, I don't know, with Trump running and I think that's still
it's hard to say. You know, there's some positive signs. I mean, Javi Milei in Argentina is really doing a great job at promoting our message, right? And he's actually doing, I mean, this is what we all had hoped Maxime Bernier would be up here in Canada, right? He's a populist, right? He is pushing back hard against woke ideology, and but he's a smart populist and a libertarian populist, an anarcho-capitalist populist who is actively talking about the principles and what government ought to be and the principles underneath it and the economic principles. And he's been doing this for over a decade on TV, national TV, every week, a couple times a week. And he's continuing to do it. And he's actually, making some dramatic changes in the government. So we'll see how that goes, but that might be the start of a movement, right? It might be the start of a new movement, and it might spread, and we might see those ideas start to be picked up by other people. And, as Justin Turdo says here, some of his former conservative and liberal friends are sharing libertarian memes on Facebook. So freedom is making a comeback. I think I agree with that. I hope that's true.
Yeah, I hope so. And like I say, I mean, we're dedicated. I am anyways. I'll speak for myself. I'm dedicated to the cause of liberty. I think it's the most fundamentally important thing that we as individuals can do, if we're going to leave our mark on this planet, right? Other than, being good fathers and husbands and stuff, the best thing I think we can do to continue on that is just at least, try not to make things worse off for future generations. Right. Do whatever we can in the time that we are allotted here to maybe just do whatever we can to maybe make that a more positive experience. Because I will recognize, and this is one thing that I do share with the conservatives and the virtue people, is there's a long heritage and there's a history of some people, and they might have called themselves minarchists, they might have called themselves conservatives, they might have called themselves liberals at the time, but they're a long line of people and tradition, in particular in the West, in particular in the English-speaking sphere. Actually, not just that. Actually, I guess you could say it's the German, Austrian stuff. But anyways, this kind of fight has been ongoing, and I got to tell you, as bad as things can be at certain times, right? There are also benefits to some of those things. So once again, I'm with Tim. And I've never been the kind of person, anyways, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Really, at the end of the day, it just I don't know what else. Like I say, but I'm not a central planet. But I do know, engaged in dialogue and discourse or conversation, even with people that you may disagree with, have always proven to be a benefit, right? Yeah. It's always proven to be a benefit. So, worst case scenario, you walk away from a libertarian or a freedom type. Worst case scenario, you might have learned something today that you didn't know yesterday. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right on. All right. Well, Tim, you have yourself a good one, and all the fine folks in the chat. Really appreciate that. Sorry I didn't get to more of the chats, but this was quite an important topic. We got to cover quite a bit of it, and I'm going to be doing more live streams anyway. So I'll see you all folks in the next live stream. And once again, thanks for everyone that showed up today to watch it. Have yourself a great day. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.